Hi, this is Lloyd Alvarez, and welcome to this tutorial for aetuts.com. What I'm going to show you guys today is how I created this animation to welcome what I'm calling the birth of aetuts.com. So let's take a look at it real quick. So the first thing worth mentioning is that this intro relies heavily on the Trapcode's form plugin, which you can download a free trial of so you can follow along at home. I'm also going to be including lots of other little tips that don't rely on forms, so that even if you don't own form, you're going to be able to learn a lot of stuff along the way. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is going to create a widescreen composition. It's 960 by 540. So that we keep it in square pixel aspect ratio. And I'm going to create my text. I'm going to say it's aetuts and scale it up. Oops. I'm going to kind of move along quickly so that we don't, in the interest of keeping the tutorial as short as possible, if there's any shortcuts that I press, there's a little window that shows here in the bottom right, where you'll be able to see what shortcut I'm pressing. Like, for example, I'm going to do Apple K. So you can see there the Apple K for, composition settings. All right, so let's center this up, and that's going to be the basis for our animation. And we're going to call this comp aetuts. So now we're going to create a new comp, and we call this one form, that's where we're going to have the main form plugin. Create a new solid, normally Apple Y. We're going to call it form. Actually, let's rename this comp main. Sorry. All right, so to this solid, we're going to apply Trapcode form, and it's the form. When you first put a form on, it doesn't look very exciting. If we come down here to transform world, rotate it around. You can see that it just looks like three sort of sheets of dots. That's because here on the base form, you can see that it's a box grid, and it's got 70 particles in X, 70 in Y, and 3, and this is the 1, 2, 3, and Z. So what I actually want is just one sheet, so I'm going to make Z1, and I'm going to match the size to my comp size, which is 960 by 540. So I'm going to go, just lock that, 960 by 540, and then bring back that rotation to 0. So there it is. That's sort of filling the grid. And then the number of particles in C, see, it's how many dots fill in sort of in between. So I'm going to sort of fill in it a little bit, but not get too crazy, so that it's still sort of snappy. And the way we get sort of the particles or the dots to extrude is we go down to layer maps, and under displacement, let's go back to the project window and add this aetuts text layer. And we're going to turn it off because we're actually only using it for displacement. F3 to display this. I want the functionality to be individual XYZ, because I'm going to actually want to displace it in Z discretely from my other axes. So on the layer for Z, I'm going to choose the aetuts, and I'm going to want it to be mapped over XY, which is sort of this. Oops. Let's close this. Sorry, go back to XY. All right, so if we wrote this back around, you can see what's kind of happening here. So this text is being pushed down. If I go back here and move the strength slider, you can see sort of that the text is being pushed up and this background is being pushed down. The reason that's happening is, if we go back here, is because the way form works is if there's something is black, it pushes things down, and if it's white, it pushes them up. I actually only want the text to push up and the background to stay still. So what I need to do is create a 50% gray background, and I'm going to do that by creating a new solid here, and make sure the color is 50% gray by selecting brightness 50 and pushing that back below the text. So if we go back here again and we push the strength slider, you can see that now only the text is pushing up and down, and I wanted the text to push up, so I'm going to go kind of in the negative here with the strength slider. That's a good amount there. Alright, now I want to have this sort of text sort of coming up one letter at a time, and the way I'm going to do that is by animating the text in the text pre-comp. I'm going to bring my little piece of audio in so I can actually do it to the soundtrack. If you hit LL, it reveals the waveform, and then I'm going to hold down Shift and L to reveal the audio levels to bring this up a little bit so I can see a little bit better. Alright, so what I want is that this is sort of like the traveling area, and then if I hit preview, you can see that this is where the that sort of like slamming sound effect happens. So that's where I want the A to raise. This is where I want the E to raise, the T, and so on. So the way I'm going to do that is by animating the opacity. So if I twirl down the text here and I animate opacity, set the opacity down to 0. By moving the range selector, I can reveal my text, which is pretty good. But see, notice this is working by default on percentage. I want to go under the advanced tab and switch it from percentage to index. That allows me to control each letter by number. So if I set start to 1, I'm only revealing the A, 2, the E, and so forth. So that way I can easily control when each letter hits each spot. So if I want, when this hits, if I want the A to be here, I'm going to set a keyframe for 1 there. So 1, I'm going to set a keyframe. And then of course I want to, let me hit U so I can actually see both of them together. I'm going to go back a little bit and set this to 0 so it actually fades up. See that to A. If I go back again under Advanced, it actually is set to square, which you would actually think that actually would not dissolve up, that would actually kind of sort of cut on. But that's because the smoothness is set to 100. If I actually set this to 0, it actually cuts on. See, let's go back to, let's go here where we would see the E. So then that would be 2. So because the smoothness, now let's go back to this, is set to 0, they actually cut on. But when the smoothness is set to 100, it's kind of like an easy ease ramp into the dissolves. And let's go and hit U, set the rest of our keyframes here. This would be 3. This would be 4. This would be 5. And this would be 6 here. And then you also just want to set 7 so that the ramp keeps going. So if we preview this, so right now it doesn't actually really look very good because we can't really tell when the sort of dissolve is sort of finishing. But if we go back to our main comp and we sort of twirl down, you can see what we're going to do is create a new camera. And I always like using a 50mm. It's one of my favorite lenses in real world, so I like to use it in motion graphics a lot. I'm going to turn off the depth of field for now. And I'm also going to, so instead of utilizing the forms rotate world, which revolves around the sort of center of the form world, I'm going to set that back to 0. See, the problem is if I just rotate the camera here on X, it actually, so notice how it kind of moves it up and down. It's not revolving around that center of axis. If I put 2 views up here side by side, I actually want the camera to revolve around this center of axis, sort of where the point of interest is, which is 0 on C. So the way I do that is I create a null object, make it 3D, so it's there. So if I look at them both together, and all I have to do is parent the camera to that null, and then rotate the null. Oops, rotate, there you go. So now when I rotate the null, see how it's essentially doing the same thing. So I'm going to use the null to rotate the camera, and then use the camera. If I hit the C key, which is this tool here, the camera tool, I can zoom in, and then if I hit P for the null, you can use the null to position the camera. So there we go. Rotate this a little bit more. Alright, let's go back to form. Let's make this kind of go up a little bit higher. Okay, so if we preview this, we're going to start seeing kind of when the dissolve ends. You can see there that it's a little bit too far. So now you can see how where the dissolve ends is quite clear when you're looking at it kind of like this. I think this went up too high. Let's go bring this back down. All right, so let's take a look at this again. So it's like a nice sort of ramp into that stop. I want to make it a little bit more aggressive. So if I go back here, my text selector, into the advanced section, these ease high and ease low are sort of like numerical ways of interpreting an easy ease in and an easy ease out. If I bring this to the easy ease high to 100, and we go back and look at this again, you're going to see that it's going to actually now slam into the top. See that? It just sort of rushes back up, which is a little bit too far for what I want to do. So if I split the difference and set this to 50, the text is going to now sort of dissolve up in a nice sort of fast fashion, but then not totally slam into the top. Okay, so as you can see now, it's starting to kind of look like the way I want it to look. Okay, so what I want to do now is set my keyframes for the camera. So I'm going to use the null, if I hit P, to move the camera back and forth. So I'm going to go back to one view again. So what I would like to do is, if I go here, I'm going to set some markers. Let's close this up. So I want to set some markers. So this is where my A first hits. So I'm going to come back here and hit the star key and the number pad to set a marker. I'm going to name that A. And then go back here to the S and set a keyframe there for S. So I'm going to put my camera kind of be on the sort of so that it hits kind of when it's on this side. Set a keyframe there. And then go to the S and then move over to this side. So to have the S be kind of filling in on the right side there. It's kind of pretty good there. And then beforehand, I want to kind of travel through, so I'm going to go back this way so that if we preview this quickly, we can see that it's sort of traveling as the intro music happens, and then when we get to this point, the A happens. See now the E, and we're sort of finding all the way that all the letters are kind of rising to the top until we get to the S, and then we're going to start pulling back. All right. So I want to kind of start sort of rotating and pulling back kind of halfway. So let's kind of go to, I don't know, around this point and set keyframes for the X rotation. And then we're going to utilize, so we're using the null to sort of move left and right, and the X rotation, and using the camera. If we reveal P for position and A for point of interest, set some keyframes here, and we're going to sort of go a little bit past the S and then pull out and then rotate back to 0. So if we do that, we pull out, and as you can see, we have to push back the other way again to sort of center things up again. See, we're going to go past this keyframe. I think we're going to need to go a little bit further out, and let's make sure that looks pretty good. So these are all linear keyframes at the time, but we kind of scroll around, so the A and then all the letters happen, and then sort of we start rotating out, and then right now it's kind of harsh, but we're going to do, since it eases, I think we can also go a little bit tighter here. So let's kind of zoom in, so make this a little bit more dramatic. I don't think these letters have to rise quite so high, so let's lower this up a little bit. All right. And so what we want to do is first let's deal with the left and right motion. So instead of having linear keyframes, this particular keyframe, if you hold down the command or control key and click on it, it switches to a sort of round keyframe if you look at the graph editor. So if it's a linear keyframe, oh wow, look at that. Normally linear keyframes look like this. I happen to have nailed this perfectly. So I don't think I actually need to, but if I just do that round, it actually helps that keyframe. If I move this, you can see more what's happening. See? If it's linear, that's what it looks like. But I just happen to get lucky here. And by putting it there, it actually, so I don't even need the keyframe. When we get here, I actually wanted to sort of ease into a stop. So instead of looking like this, if you kind of right click and select easy ease, it comes to a stop and then keeps going. And then what I want to do with the rotation and the point of interest is I want it to sort of slowly start rotating. So I'm going to select the easy ease out. So I want it to ease out of these keyframes. And I'm actually going to expand these curves so that it's even a little bit more gentle the way it sort of pulls out. And then finally I want them to sort of ease into a stop. So I'm going to easy ease in these keyframes. So let's take a preview here. It's looking pretty good. So I think we went a little bit too far with this. Let's go back it up a little bit. That's probably what the problem is. And now we can actually see if you can see that how it's kind of up and down. So now we can actually choose this to be a round keyframe so that it's smoother. So hitting the, all right, that looks pretty good there. All right, so that's smoothing into it. Okay, so as you can tell quickly is, first of all, it's not, the particle's kind of big. So let's go back to form and set the particle size down. So if we go under particle size, it's set to 1. Let's do 0.5. So now it's looking a little better. And let's put a few more particles, sort of an X and Y. And right now they're all sort of even. If you look at this animation, they're the particles are kind of all different sizes. So we're going to set the particle size to random. Let's go 100% random. See, that's helping already. And also if you do the opacity random, see some of them are brighter than others. That's, I think, too much. Let's split the difference to 50%. And the other clear thing is right now there's sort of not, there isn't a wall that goes between the base and the top of the A. That's because remember what I was saying, how the the white is, pushing forward and the gray is sort of staying still. There's no sort of in-between values in between the white and the gray, and the way we get those is by simply blurring the text layer. So if we go here, effect blur, box blur, just set like a 5-point radius. Now if we go back here, you can see now we have a wall. So if we preview this quickly, you can see that as it rises, there's a wall that comes up, which is very nice. And the other thing we need to do is have these these particles here. We need to have them colored purple and these colored white. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to duplicate our AE Tuts text comp. And we're going to name the original one. This is our displacement map. And this new one is going to be our color map. Color map. So go into there. And so instead of having the background be gray, we're going to have the background be the purple that we need. So we're going to, it looks like I already have a ramp. So let's search for a ramp plugin. Go here. I'm going to open my logo, and I'm going to go back to my ramp plugin, I'm going to color pick the top and bottom of the ramp. So here we go. It's our colors of the logo. And back in our main, under form, let's close that up. Let's see. Here we go. Under layer maps, color and alpha, we're going to choose the. So we need to add. So I'm going to duplicate our displacement map. Back to the project window. I'm going to hold on the option key as I drag and replace. So now I have both my displacement map and my color map. They're both turned off. I'm going to turn off the audio so I only have one copy of the audio. Under form and go under color and alpha, I'm going to select the color map and I want to choose RGB and alpha and I want to map it over XY. So yeah, you can see the A now is white and everything else is purple. Okay, so now that we have the color set, let's start adding some of the wave that's happening in the animation. So if we come back here, go back to form, and under the fractal field, if we open that, the displacement mode is set to linked. What we want to do is we actually want to displace thing in Z independent of the other axis. So we're going to switch this to XYZ individual, and that way we can displace Z independently. So if we drag this, you can see now how you can actually displace it in Z. So let's bring it up just a little bit. And what the flow values are is how much the particles flow in either direction. So the number here is what that speed is. So we wanted to actually move up and down, but actually have them flow from left to right on X. So we're going to set the X setting to something like 10, just a little bit. So if we take a look at this and preview this, you can see here that this is actually sort of moving the particles from left to right. Oops, somehow one of our keyframes must have been moved. Let's go back to there. Let's take a look. Alright, I think that's moving too fast, so let's go back to form and lower that flow to 5. And I think it's also displacing a little bit too much. Let's try 25. Alright, so that's feeling pretty good. So if we come back to the finished animation, and back it up a little bit. Oops, beach ball. That's always lovely. There we go. Alright, so one of the things that we can see is that the edge of the map is not feathered. So if we go back to the color map, all we need to do is create a feathered mask. So by selecting the solid and doing round mask and double clicking, we can then hit F for feather that mask, and then MM and bring in the expansion so that if we go back here, now we can see how it's sort of feather off into the edges. And so we have our sort of our wave motion, our text is coming up. What we need to do now is, as you can also see here, is add this very narrow depth of field, which we're going to do by turning on the camera depth of field, by double clicking, turning on enable depth of field. And you can immediately see, let's go here to where the camera, so you can see nothing happens. That's because in form you need to go under render mode and turn on depth of field by selecting one of the two depth of field modes. The difference between square and smooth is square renders faster but utilizes a block splitter, which sometimes is not as nice, but in our case it works just fine. And so what we need to do now is modify sort of the focus distance. So let's set to 1300. Let's move this down to like 250 or something. So there you can see the sort of, let's move back a little bit more. It's a little bit closer, I guess. And the aperture is how wide the area that is in focus, sort of the how narrow or wide the depth of field is. So the higher the aperture, the more narrow the depth of field is, and the lower the aperture, the wider the area that is in focus. So let's lower this just a bit, so to 20, and let's take a look at that. You know, we can actually lower the number of particles just while we're previewing. Let's go to like 350, 200, and you can see here where it's kind of coming up. I think we're a little bit too rotated, so if we go here to the rotation, we might want to move this back a little bit so that it's so. Now it's sort of looking a little bit more. So the particles kind of encroach here a little bit in camera, but not too much. And sort of this sort of middle area is in focus, so that when it kind of rises to the top, it adds more drama. I think our camera here is a little bit too excited, so let's, oops. All right. Okay, so now that we have our camera set, we can then start working on the finishing touches of this thing. And that is, so we can bring our sort of our particle count back up. So let's go back to like 700, oops, like 300. So as you can see, as we increase the particle count, the brightness sort of comes up in the particles. So if you need to adjust that, you can go to opacity and set the opacity of each particle down. So if I lower that back up, you can see here how now it's sort of distributing, you know, how that looks. So if we come along as the sort of letters are rising out of the thing, I think the displacement's a little too high. Let's get this down to like 10. Yeah, there we go. It's starting to look kind of more like the finished piece. And let's lower this up a little bit. It's a little too intense. It's 500. So now, sort of here in the finishing area, let's kind of do a U so we can see what's happening. So let's preview from here on. So as you can see, as it's sort of going away, the focus distance changes. So we need to animate the focus distance for the camera. So kind of like here, it's still in focus. So here, where it's still in focus, I'm going to set a keyframe for the camera focus distance. And then go sort of the finishing point. And it kind of goes completely dark. But as we move the focus distance and it becomes in focus, it kind of becomes more visible. See, as we kind of go further there, might need to bring some more particles back so we can see that. 1,000. All right. Oops. So you can see 2,000. That's like probably like, I don't know. Yeah, that's probably too far. All right, so that looks pretty good. And if we take a look now, as it's turning away, the camera, you know, is kind of focusing away so that it kind of keeps pace with this area that's going away, and it focuses with it. So now now that it stays in focus. And the last thing we need to do is, as it's fading away, we need to sort of fade this away and bring in a new full graphic version. And the way we're going to do that is duplicate the color map one last time and rename this one Final Logo. Open this up, and instead of having this sort of blurred thing, we can actually take the blur away. Actually, I'm going to just leave 1 point blur, so it's just a little soft. Everything on film is a little soft, so I like to keep things soft. We can delete this mask and actually create a rectangular mask so that it looks like the finished logo. Let's make this in the right shape. And it looks pretty good. And what we're going to do is, for the finishing animation, so that when we go, let's see, from, when it kind of hits the final spot there, we want it to sort of, actually, let's go back to the main. I'm going to duplicate this color map and replace in the final logo. And this one we actually want to turn on. We want to make it a 3D layer so that it matches the motion. If we bring the opacity down, we can see how it aligns. See how it aligns perfectly? That's one of the reasons why we actually utilize the null and the camera to do the animation, so that it actually, see how it actually just automatically animates with the other one. So at this point, we're going to create a new round mask on here. So that's kind of centered. We're going to feather this mask. Let's solo this so we can see this by itself. The opacity was brought down. Let's bring it back up. So if we bring this mask in, oops. If I hold down the Command and Shift key, it centers from the center. So you can see there the feathered brown mask, kind of like that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a keyframe for it sort of there in the center, M for mask, and then just a few frames forward I'm going to animate it so that it comes out like that. And if we kind of preview this, and it's soloed, we also want to bring up the opacity beforehand so that it dissolves up sort of before it animates on. And what I want to do is, for the form layer, which has all this stuff, I want to fade it down, so I'm going to reveal opacity so that it kind of like dips to black before the other one animates up, so that if we go see here, as it's fading back, it dips to black and then the other one sort of fades up. So fade that to 0. Let's take a look. Oops. Got to turn off my caps locks. Now it looks a little dim right now because I have my particle count set down in the interest of rendering this thing a little bit faster. But once we turn that back up, we'll be able to see it in the full glory. So there's a little bit of a hit here on the camera, so if we quickly take a look at that, gonna ease that out a little bit, just ease that in there. Alright, so that should take care of that. Alright, so I think the last thing we need to do is just get the color right, and so the way we're going to do that is go back here and bring our particle count back up. So go back to form again, F3. So, oh look, the particles were turned up. Let's see, there's 500 on this. Alright, let's go actually here where the A rises. So one of the things I did was add the, look at that, our focus distance is not set right. It's just set to like 250, I believe. I don't know how that got changed. Yeah, okay. Actually, that could probably be a little bit closer. Let's try 200. Yeah, that's better. Maybe even 150. Oops, 150. No, that might be too close, I think. Yep, too close. Let's go 200. That's pretty good. All right. If you can see here, I actually added Trapcode Shine to get these sort of rays coming out of the ground. So on the form layer, I just go and add Trapcode Shine. And as you can see by default, it does that. I don't want that. So if I go under Colorize and I select None, it's going to pick up the colors from the layer. And here's the center. See if I push this back, I'm zoom out. Let's just pull this down so it looks like it's actually shooting straight up. I'm going to bring the ray length down, quite a bit down. And right now the transfer mode is set to none. If I set this to normal, it's going to reveal my layer. So as you can see now, it's starting to look kind of like I want it to look. And one of the things I did in this one is I kind of cheated the colors here in the beginning. The way you do that is by going into the color map and cheating this bottom color by being a little bit more saturated. So by that being more saturated, it's starting to pick up. I think I did a little bit more in the final render, but you can play with that if you kind of go a little bit more. You can see what I mean. And then what I did is animated the ray length. So under my form layer, I went to Trapcode Shine, just animated my ray length, so that as you can see, as it starts turning, it doesn't look so good. So before it starts turning, kind of like around here, actually that's where I should set my keyframe. And then once it's sort of fully turned, like there, I actually go to 0, so that it doesn't have it anymore. And if I preview that quickly, you can see that the rays are going to sort of like shrink down as it's turning. Let's kind of skip along. There, see, sort of the rays are going away. And so as you can see, it fades away, and the new graphic logo. And the final thing I did was add a new adjustment layer. And to that one, we're going to call that grain. And I'm going to say noise and grain, add grain. And you can see that what's happening is in that little box. If I switch that from preview to final output, it'd see the whole area. One of the grains I really like, if I should preset, is the Eastman EXR 100. And one of the things is you want to choose grain, is you want to see it in your full resolution at 100% so you can see kind of what's going on there. I actually lowered it just a little bit, so I actually went half as much. And if you can see here, you can actually see the grain. And again, film has grain, film has the narrow depth of field, so by adding those things, it's what makes this piece feel cinematic. So if we finally take a look at this again. One of the things I forgot is that as once it fades off to black, let's go back to half. After it fades off to black, it actually starts zooming back in. So I actually set a couple keyframes here after the fact. Oops, where if we go back here. So I actually had this be sort of further back. So if I zoom this a little bit back, and then I went further forward. And then I set keyframes with it zoomed in so that I utilized that fade to black moment. I guess it wasn't very centered. Let's go back so it's centered. I utilized that sort of fade to black moment to reverse the camera and hide that what would not be a very pleasant keyframe moment. So anyway, that's it. Hope you learned a few things, and this is, I realized there's a lot of advanced techniques, but I think this is totally approachable and totally doable. And I hope you enjoyed this. This is Lloyd Alvarez for aetuts.com.